Hi folks, today one more episode of Supply Chain Show. Again we have Richard. We'll talk about today the famous topic of indirect procurement. I get a lot of questions about what is it, what are the best practices, challenges, and why it's different. And who can be best but Richard? So Richard, please start with your quick introduction.
Well, great to see you again. Richard Beaumont. I currently work with a mix of big and small companies, but I guess my last proper job was as Chief Procurement Officer of Co-op Bank, lots of indirect spend, and before that with Rolls-Royce and McKinsey. So sounds like a great topic.
Yeah, great topic. I think the first question is, let's define the basics. What is indirect procurement?
Okay, well, it's a really good question. So the definition is that it is the stuff that you procure that does not go into the goods and services that you sell to your customers. Of course, the tricky bit about that is depending on what you're selling to your customers means that your own company definition of indirect procurement could be very different. However, I think, look, as a safe bet, we would probably recognise that things like corporate services, so legal, audit, tax, insurance, FM, maybe even IT, those kind of things will typically be found in an indirect procurement. And the big characteristic, a huge tail of mess, of travel, phones, stationery, and all the things that we love to buy.
We love to buy, yeah, and all goes in. So now we know what's the definition of indirect procurement.
Okay.
And I think before the interview we talked about, I think you said some great ideas how to manage it, how to get the best out of this spend. Let's spend some time on that.
Well, that's a good question, and I think in order to understand how you're going to manage something, it's important to understand about what makes it different.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at indirect spend, let's just generalize. Tends to be pretty high value.
Yeah.
It tends to have a very low level of interest generally in the business.
We'll come back to that actually.
Yeah. But when it goes wrong, it can have a really big focus and it can have a really big impact. So if you're going to manage it well, it's really about how do you get your arms around the topic. And that means information, it means systems, because there's going to be lots of complicated contracts lying around. And it's about how can you make things as efficient as possible. And I think we'll come back and talk about that in a minute, about how could you make it work well.
Yes. So let's talk about creating that interest, because everyone is if I used to work for the manufacturing company, tire company, and all that, right? So the key focus is around the raw material, as you said, you buy. People want to find the best supplier, create the best relationship of that. But if you think about it, a huge amount of money goes to the facilities, as you said, buying bits and bobs, travel and hotel, right? So how you generate interest to the senior leadership level, there is a huge money to be saved on.
Okay, so here's a really good juggle, right? So if you think, let's just take two examples, right? Let's talk about legal and let's talk about IT.
Yeah.
So you've got two topics which are absolutely critical to two really senior members of the executive team, Chief Legal Officer and the CIO. There's a bit of a track record here, and anybody in procurement will know this. If you go and start trying to tell the Chief Legal Officer or the CIO what to get or how to do it, you are on a downward path to nowhere. So actually it's around how do you manage that stakeholder and how do you support them to build a requirement that you can then take to the market to get the right solution. So for me, the biggest way of generating interest is start with the owner. Get the owner to tell you who are the key players in defining what you need. Legal's a great example. They're going to have a panel, but actually legal's going to be across product, it's going to be across copyright, it's going to be across employment law. So there's a bunch of stakeholders out there in the business, and you can help, like a great procurement facilitator, bring together those stakeholders to help the person who owns it to identify the requirement. That to me is the core thing of successful indirect procurement.
But what if, and this is, so let me talk about my marketing folks, right?
Okay.
Huge, we're talking marketing, instead of marketing folks in millions.
Yes.
Right, they just go, and in most companies I've seen, right, they almost, they're the marketing, product marketing folks, they're outsourced to agencies, right? Yeah. And somehow those marketing agencies is outside your spend, right? So I actually challenge them, right? Guys, you're spending literally millions with your agencies. Why this cannot be managed through procurement people and as a spend, and then we can see what we can do with it. And they just don't touch it.
Do you know what? This challenge, and it happens in IT as well, a lot, right? But marketing is a great example. there's a perception. You know, you could come up with a stereotypical image of a marketing team.
Yeah.
Dynamic, fast-paced, flexible, artistic, and the last thing on the world they want is Mr. Process or Mrs. Process from procurement coming to tell them about their RFP and how they get them on board.
Yeah.
So don't try. If that's how that team works, you've got to operate as a procurement specialist that understands it. So think, what we're creating is an environment of agencies, of creative material, of channels to market for the marketing material itself. They are going to want to chop and change. They want to bring on new ideas. So start from that premise and make it possible for them to do it. And you know, in the case of marketing, I'm an absolute believer. The business partner model of having someone from your team who works in that team day in, day out to become a trusted advisor, that's the way forward.
I mean, recently I posted on this. So I'm working with the marketing team to optimize their digital marketing. And you know, we want to be partner with them and how you basically make the most out of this and basically give them content ideas as well. Because procurement guys, if you're saying, you know, as a procurement person, just an off topic, that you're doing something improvement to company's image because you're helping them out in brand value. So taking Richard's point, becoming a partner, the one way you can do it, basically add a value in the work they do.
Absolutely.
Right? So let's a bit off topic, but how
important, right?
So I think we mentioned, we talk about the importance of it, why we should do it, what is it, but then now we know what it is, then let's talk about optimization. Right?
Okay.
So again, the spend is there now to leverage it, how you can optimize it, drive cost reductions maybe.
Okay, so I mentioned that dreaded word right at the beginning, tail spend. Okay, tail spend in indirect is a big challenge. And you know, my simplest piece of advice is look at the spend from big ticket item down to the smallest tail, and decide how far up that chain you can simply get it off your desk. And that means, how do you move to self-service? How do you use technology? How do you outsource it? How do you create a dedicated team? Whatever the model works for you, you don't want your team tied up with day-to-day nitty-gritty of dealing with small stuff. So get that gone.
Explain self-service again. Look, I think we know it, but I don't think everybody knows. So what is self-service you mean?
Well, it's as simple as, you know, there are providers now. You can look at Amazon for Business, you can look at 𝐥𝐤, you can look at 𝐼𝐸, where you're creating catalogs and you have the IT infrastructure within your business that simply says, look, if I'm authorized to spend up to £1,000 a week and I can buy the following items, I can just go and do it like I would do an app on my phone. And I never have to bother anyone in procurement in it. Now, if you can get that kind of stuff off your desk, you can focus on the big stuff.
Perfect. You know, Richard, I think this is a topic we can go on again. But again, we want to keep the video short and sweet. Thank you very much for your time. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure. Good to see you. Take care. Bye-bye.
I aim to do knowledge videos and interviews with procurement and supply chain professionals and leaders. Consider subscribing to this channel. And I have written practical guides on supply chain. See the link below.